And I'm live. It's alive. How's it going, everybody? Thank you very much for joining another one of my live chats. And I'm excited about this one because I'm talking about sort of something like that can be a little scary. I'm talking about wilderness survival and, what happens if something goes wrong on one of my big canoe trips, right? Um, and if you think about it, um, a lot of people call what I'm doing survival, right? They say, oh, can't, maybe you even see something, oh, camping is part of the survival genre, right? Um, but to me, which, I could see the point there too, but to me, survival is when everything goes wrong. Survival is like not fun, like camping, canoeing, you could call it traditional skills, bushcraft in motion, even if you want. But survival is when things get really, really dicey. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I have my Baird adventurer hat on, quite literally right here. I had a bunch of these left. I made a bunch of them. I just carried it over my shoulders because I'm strong. You're going to be big and strong like Daddy one day too. That's Hudson. He just chimed in. So I actually had these made a few years ago, and I gave 10% of all sales to Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, which I'm going to do again. I kind of stopped selling them, and I pulled a bunch out, and I have a bunch left. There's this black with a digi camo underbrim. There's the gray, like a military gray, and there's the all camo. So I'm selling them right now. They make an awesome Christmas present. Sorry, this one's sold out. Oh man, maybe I should wear another one.
But then you won't be able to sell it.
What? This one's sold out?
Yeah, that one's sold out.
Oh, so this one is sold out. So we have to wear the all camo one. Sorry, this is not going too smoothly. Hey, honey, come say hi. Come say hi.
Hi.
No, come look here and say hi.
Hi.
That's Huddy. What movie are you watching tonight? The Grinch. The Grinch. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So without further, okay. So you can check out. It's on my Facebook page. You can check out my Facebook page. And do that. And yeah, I'm going to dive right into it. I'm starting to really, really love this beer. Like, I don't really have a favorite beer, but Detour is just, it's good. And then it just gets better. It grows on you. This is by Muskoka Brewery, who makes, collabs with me on my Baird adventure, Windbound Pilsner. And it's just a local brewery that's just like one of the best in the world, in my humble opinion. So yeah, if you haven't tried it, try Detour by Muskoka Brewery. Tread Lightly is good. Their Mad Tom IPA is great too. It's a West Coast IPA. It's really good. So I see a lot of other people joining in here. Hey everyone, I just wanted to, I like to blab a little bit at the beginning before I dive into it, just to let some more people jump in. So I see we got a few people on here, so that's awesome. So yeah, so we're talking about wilderness survival. So what is like a survival situation, right?
Hey,
I guess technically it's whether you're lost or stranded, one or the other. So how could this happen? I'm out in the bush. Anybody that's seen my Hess River adventure, I had a crazy dump. I tried running a rapid that I really shouldn't have been running, and I dumped on the first wave and had a terrible swim. What's that?
Good night, Daddy.
Oh, good night, buddy. Yeah. You have a good sleep tonight, okay? I'll see you in the morning. I love you. Nice, Hedy. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, so I lost my canoe temporarily, and I became separated from it. So usually what I do is I keep a throw bag, which is basically just a bag with a rope in it. And I keep one side of that rope clipped to the canoe. So if I pull, we're not So I keep one side of that. I keep that one side of that throw bag rope clipped to the canoe, and I keep the throw bag under a little bungee at the bow and stern. So if I dump, I can grab the throw bag, pull it out, and then I have the canoe on the end of the rope. And usually, hopefully, I can get to shore before that throw bag rope extends all the way. And with the airbags in my canoe and the gear that has flotation, the canoe usually floats upside down, floats high enough in the water that I can kind of pull it and ferry that canoe into shore, into a back eddy while I'm swimming. Which is funny because I've had a lot of practice dumping. I guess it happens when you try to push the envelope sometimes. But on the Hess River, I couldn't grab the throw bag because I dumped. And for anyone that's not familiar with the Hess, this is a extremely remote, fly-in wilderness river in the Yukon. It's arguably the most challenging whitewater river in the territory, right? And I'm washed down the rapid, and I get out after a very, scary and exhausting swim, and I can't see my canoe anywhere. It's gone. And the river took a tight dog leg like this, and there was an overhang under the water basically. And I was worried that the canoe washed into that and was pinned irretrievably below this ledge underwater. And, I bring a survival kit with me. So that's another thing that we want to talk about too, right? Is when you're doing these remote whitewater rivers, all your gear is in the canoe. If you should lose your canoe, you have nothing except what's on your body, So I carry a good, robust, but not so robust that it's clunky and gets hung up on stuff. But I carry a solid wilderness survival kit in a fanny pack around my waist, except I don't call it a fanny pack. I call it a survival pack because it sounds way cooler than a fanny pack. Like if you call it a fanny pack, you're just going to forget it because it doesn't sound important enough. So yeah, that's what I do. And that way, if I lose everything, I'm going to have that kit on me. I also carry a Garmin InReach, which I tether to my belt with a carabiner clip. So an InReach is I have a Garmin 66i, which is has satellite texting capabilities. It has an SOS button, and it also is a GPS as well. So super helpful. So I keep that on me. And of course, I have my multi-tool and usually a sheath knife of a decent size on me. And one of the reasons I recommend doing that when you're in the treed country is that should you lose your canoe, if you have a knife, I'm not talking about a Rambo knife this big, but if you have a decent size fixed blade belt knife, then you can actually use that to even chop down trees by batoning, hitting it with another stick, and you can baton and split. And so you can, even if you're hypothermic and you need to make a big warming fire with a good knife, you're not reduced to whatever little sticks you can find and break with your feet and hands. So that's pretty important. But survival kit, multi-tools, belt, knives aside, I dumped on the river. I dumped on this rapid on the Hess. I washed ashore, and I got out and I couldn't find my canoe. And let me tell you, that survival kit that I put together and was feeling really good about before the trip felt like absolutely nothing. And I actually got really scared, and I couldn't shake that fear for almost 2 days. I still had that fear of my canoe's gone. I'm in an extremely remote area. I'm cold. I have my dry suit on, but some water got in. There was just soaked with sweat. It wasn't warm out. All my clothes underneath were pretty wet, right? At that point, I was like, okay, stuff's getting real here. At that point, I would have been about a 20-mile walk out to the North Canal Road, which then I could have followed and maybe been to somebody, maybe not, across mountain ranges, lakes and rivers too, not just a straight little trot on a sidewalk. So that's what can happen, right? So if you are on a canoe trip, now usually in a canoe, you're not running rapids that will kill you if you dump, right? So, and I would recommend that's a pretty good baseline. You want to run whitewater, stuff like that. But when you're looking at rapid, you're like, will I drown if I dump, or can I swim this? Probably if the answer is you're going to drown, it might not be the best one to run, right? So, oftentimes, you're not running extreme stuff that a kayak can run that has, a kayak has buoyancy. You have a cockpit that is pretty much airtight. It can't swamp like a canoe can, right? So, oftentimes when it comes to drowning or getting hypothermia, or when it comes to just drowning, let's say, when you're in a canoe and you tip in a rapid, you're probably not going to drown. You could get your foot stuck between rocks and that could pin you. That's a serious concern, and it can happen easier than you think, right? But what's likely, the danger is not that you drown. The danger is that you lose your canoe. Some of these rivers have ripping current that goes on and on forever. Another river, the Kisagami, a very, very challenging whitewater river in Northern Ontario that I soloed, I had a pretty nasty spill on that due to a very strong gusting headwind, nothing to do with me, of course. Very serious gusting headwind. And I barely got my canoe over to shore because of the preceding waterfall. So on the river like the Kisagami, it's a serious whitewater river because the rapids are stacked, and then there's, pretty serious sized waterfalls in between. And so essentially, I dumped on one. I pretty much barely got my canoe over to shore in time before it would have washed down a waterfall right after that. I had to portage that next waterfall, and I found a smashed in half canoe. This is a Royal X canoe. This is like, these things have fallen off of float planes before and been recovered, and the seats might have been smashed, but like you're good to go. And this is smashed in half, and that's just how powerful the pressure of the water is, right? So that's kind of your concern. So what do you do, right? And then, a lot of the time, though, when it comes down to it, right, it's not really people that are on remote expeditions, right, that run into a survival situation. It's not really the Arctic explorer guy that's doing some winter trip walking across on Gava, which I did almost run into a survival situation on, but managed to skirt it. It's just the unexpected things when people get lost, right? So I should have Les Stroud on my podcast, Survivor Man. That'd be a great guy to chat about this stuff with. But a lot of the time it's people that they go to a national park, they go for a walk, they decide I'm going to jump off trail. They're not, carrying their survival gear with them because they're just going on a relatively simple walk, and they get off trail to check something out. They get turned around. They don't know which way to get back to the trail. And, you start doing circles, which is all too possible. Those are, more seriously the things that happen. You hear stories about someone leaving camp to go to the washroom, let's say at night, and not finding their way back. Then next thing you know, it's the spring. It was a nice warm day. Spring is actually the most dangerous time for hypothermia. And that's what the real killer is, right? Is hypothermia. It's not winter when most people get it, because in the spring is when you go out there, you got a nice day, it's warm out, and you think, oh, I don't need my sweater. I don't, and you get turned around, and all of a sudden, you work up a sweat. Maybe you don't have a way to light a fire, and you get turned around, and the next thing you know, you're lost, and it goes down to -4 that night, which is, fairly relatively common in the spring. And that's when people die the most commonly, right? So how do you avoid these things is a good question. Hey, you got a lot of people. Hey, welcome everybody that's just joining in right now. So yeah, how do you avoid death? Well, in this day and age, um, it's a good idea to take some calms. Okay, you can get a Garmin InReach, which is not as big and bulky as a satellite phone. One of the reasons I like the InReach is because I can keep it on my person, where a satellite phone, it's going to be, in a dry bag with your gear in your canoe. So again, if you dump and you lose your canoe, you can't exactly access the sat phone to call anyone. So that's why having some sort of satellite communication equipment on your person in your pocket is a really good idea. And actually, it might not be a bad idea now that I'm thinking about it to add just a very small uh, anchor battery, like a battery that you could then charge your InReach off of with a cable, right? And that way you'll be able to contact someone and say, hey, I'm in trouble. You keep the names in there. But those things break too. What if you fall down a mountain, you injure yourself, and that's smashed, right? So you don't want to rely on these things and just go out there being like, oh, we got a satellite phone, we got an InReach, let's just act like a bunch of dummies out there and do a bunch of crazy stuff, right? So that's not something to give you a false sense of security. And believe me, I had a satellite phone when I was crossing the Angava Peninsula solo in winter, which was a 36-day, Arctic expedition. And I got stuck in a blizzard that was crazy, and I couldn't get my tent up. I'd worked up a sweat. And to get my tent up in a blizzard, you have to build a strong snow block wall. And then you have to set your tent up behind that. Well, the snow wasn't great for doing this in the spot I was in. I did my best. Right as I finished, the wind changed directions. And I had to basically rebuild this wall. So imagine I've just walked about 22K pulling a heavy pulk, up hills, you name it, exhausted. This is probably, day 18 or something like that. And it takes me 5 or 6 hours between getting to where I need to camp. A blizzard's coming. Better get set up quick here. I better get my tent set up and get safe quick. Between that point and when my tent's set up and I can crawl inside, 5 or 6 hours it took me. And just working through exhaustion and cold. And usually when you're working, you can do that. And I just realized that, the satellite phone at that point is going to be great because you can tell people roughly where they could find the body, right? Because nobody can come rescue it. Even if it was a perfect day, for someone to prep for a trip to come and pick me up, let's say somebody that lives like an Inuit landsman that lives in one of the small remote communities on the coast in Arctic Quebec. Let's say one of them said, you come and pick Jim Baird up. For him to prep for an expedition, to get the gas, to prep for the food, to pack all his camping gear together for a trip like that. I mean, to say that it would take one day would be, or else if he just wrecked out there willy-nilly, they're going to be in trouble, right? So even in perfect weather, it's going to take, at least a day for them to prep, probably 2. And then it's going to take 2 days for them to get there. So if you're in a blizzard and you're hypothermic and you have, an hour or 2 before you die, and it's bad weather, you're talking about a week before someone can really get you. So it's really true. And it's it's not something I invented. I heard mountain climbers say this, is that you carry satellite phones so that people can recover your body. So not to sound foreboding, but yeah, it's not something that should give you a false sense of security. Now on, I don't know, Hulu and a bunch of, it might be on Netflix now, I'm not sure. But in my season they did pairs, and me and my brother Ted were both on alone. And spoiler alert, we won after 75 days in the wilderness. And I didn't really know how my skills were going to stack up, because there's a lot of people out there that are practicing more survival skills than I am. I learned survival, and it's always something that fascinated me. And the real survival skill I realized that I was doing all the time in the harshest conditions was getting a fire going, right? I remember I was on a canoe trip across northern Quebec and Labrador. There's a video on my channel just called The Labrador. It's probably the best and most hardcore canoe trip I've ever done. And Marty, this younger guy that we'd swindled into coming into the trip because we needed a fourth, I was just kind of like nerding out. We were hitting the tail end of Hurricane Irene. And we were like, we got to pull over and make camp. It was cold. We were soaked. It was windy. We had to start a fire pretty much under our tarp. Well, yeah, under our tarp at the end, because it was raining so hard. And we managed to get dinner at us. But anyways, when I got to camp, everyone's like, how are we going to do anything? It's getting soaked. Like, I said, it's okay, Marty. This is a great opportunity to practice how to rig a tight camp when things are tough. And Marty looks at me. He's like, I don't think this is practice, man. This is the real thing. And like, he was kind of freaking out. And I just thought that was funny, because here I was still using this as an opportunity to practice, right? And I think at the end of the day, that kind of explains why I had the skills on alone, the survival skills, because I'm out there doing things in very real situations. And I think it's a bit of a myth when it comes to survival, because it's what the myth is sort of that, like, practicing survival skills is really survival. Like if you say, like, we're going to go survival camping, and you light a bow drill fire and you sleep in a shelter. That's not really survival. That's fun. Survival is terrifying, and it is not fun at all. Like, light a bow drill fire when you're exhausted, hypothermic, everything's wet, and it's like the last thing you want to do in the universe. That's, and and you're worried for your life. That's what survival really is, right? And so when you're in a situation where you can just go home, or you can, you're in your backyard and you're like, I don't need to light a fire in these conditions or whatever. But when you have, like, you can leave, or you're not in danger. That if you don't get a fire going, you're not really gonna die. But when you're actually in these super remote areas doing these things, getting the fires going when you don't have another choice, becomes second nature to you. It's like, your tolerance for suffering becomes way more. Having fun, because when you're in danger and not in danger, because you just have that experience and you understand what your skill set is. Where the guy beside you, who maybe doesn't have as much experience, might be miserable and want to go home. And the only way that you can build up that resistance to suck is by starting to embrace it, by just getting out there and doing it more and more, and you stop feeling those uncomfortable things. And I think that really, in a way, is the real survival skill, right? Because it's not something you can learn on a YouTube video. It's not something you could read in a book, right? It's something that can only come from experience, from hard bush time. And I think at the end of the day, even though Ted and I didn't know how to nap arrowheads, and we weren't out there, doing all these kind of traditional bushcraft type skill things, because when we go out there, we have modern equipment. Sure, it's, traditional as in a canoe and a paddle, but, it's not made of birch bark, and we bring a modern tent and we bring a modern fishing rod, right? So I'm not whittling my fishing rods and, making canoes out of birch bark when I'm there, right? So I didn't know if I was going to have those skills, but it turns out that we really did have the real skills that mattered out there. And I think how we can unpack that, and I'll get into a little bit more what you do in a survival situation, right? I can get into that, but I think what I'm touching on, from my experience, I think is the way deeper reality behind survival that for some reason nobody really talks about or shares, right? You look at and it's because I guess the point is it's psychology, right? Your psychology is the biggest one. So, all the survival books, all the survival instructors, right? They, and you're talking about a guy who's been in a loan, right? So, like, yeah, okay, it's a TV show still. So I don't even really, I guess the blizzard and Gava, but as far as like being lost and never knowing whether they're going to be rescued, I don't have a tap out button. So I still don't know what it is, but I feel like I have a pretty darn good idea, more of an idea than I really want to have. But so you look at these survival books, all right? You look at the lesson the survival courses and instructors will say is, when you're lost, first thing you do is stay calm. Then what you want to do is shelter, fire, water, food. And they teach you how to build a shelter. You get in depth on building fires. You learn water purification, and then food, which is the least important, the last one that comes in the list, because you're going to die of exposure first. So that's why shelter and fire are so important. And then you can't live without shelter. Then water, because you can live, a couple days without water, but you can go a couple weeks without food. And that's why food is last on that chain. But then food is the most complicating and a lot of times the most interesting. How to get food, how to track wild edibles, even though it's the least important, it's the biggest one, because at the end of the day, for any long-term survival situation, you need a lot of food. And that's why, these survival books, they tell people that usually in survival situations, they're short. So they, but when you see a lone, whoever ends up getting the most food wins, right? Because these are all people that know how to build a shelter. Most of them know how to build a fire. Anyone that lasts a certain amount of time knows how to build a fire, right? They can collect rainwater. They can boil lake water, no problem. But it's that food getting that makes or breaks a longer term survival situation. But yeah. And so my point here is, people go on and on about water, about shelter, fire, water, food, but nobody ever talks. It's even called the 4 pillars of survival, but nobody ever talks about stay calm. It doesn't even get a number. It's like, okay, first you stay calm, then it's shelter, water, fire, food. They just say stay calm, right? And then that's like one sentence, and then the whole book is everything else. I'll tell you what, the whole book should be about stay calm, and even if you were to write a book about how to stay calm, and it's not easy. Let me tell you, let's say you're hiking on a compass bearing, you don't have a GPS. This is something I used to do a lot before I used a GPS. I wanted to learn compass, and GPSs weren't like, everyone didn't have one in their phone, right? Even when and you're pretty sure you're on a bearing, it's getting dark. Front of you, north of you, let's say, is a hydro slash, and south of you is the road where you started, some bush forest access road. And you're like, I should be there by now. Why is this taking so long? And all of a sudden, your mind starts racing. Did I walk off my bearing? Did I not pick up my bearing right when I went around that beaver swamp? Is something going wrong? And you start to like walk faster and make foolish decisions, and you start to like panic, like this is very important, right? And so that is this situation that is what kills people, It's don't panic, because people panic and they important, right? And so that is this situation that is what kills people. It's don't panic, because people panic and they just walk in circles. The only person that ever kind of went a little more in depth to this, he was hypothermic, and he was panicking trying to get back to his car, and he was walking, and he walked right past a cabin, and he kept going, and then he's like, what the hell am I doing? And he stopped and realized he walked right past a cabin. And so he was able to turn around and follow his footprints in the snow and go and get warm in the cabin, spend the night, get his bearings. There's some tea in there. I don't know if there's some food, but get his bearings when it got bright out and find his way home. If he didn't, he might have died of hypothermia and walked right past the cabin. Because when you're in that panicky mindset, that's when things happen, right? So yeah, so what do I do? What to do if you lose your canoe in a rapid? Well, at the end of the day, if you have a working inReach and everything, even if you are, the Hood River might have been pretty interesting to try to get a rescue. Like, it's out of range of probably helicopters. Like, probably if there was one doing mining work on a Kuluk, if there so happened to be one there, I could probably have got one. But what would happen is search and rescue probably would have come out of, because you can't land a float plane in all these places, right? So search and rescue would have maybe sent a Herc out of Winnipeg on my location and would have bombed over me and dropped me supplies, dropped me warm drinks and food and, clothing and all this kind of stuff, right? And then they might have worried about how to get me out of there. If we were on like the Teslin River in the Yukon, a bit of a spoiler for anyone who's watching that show, but if you've been following us for a while, we talked about what happened at the end of that trip with our son Wesley. And fortunately, we were near a road near the Campbell Highway. And so we could actually ping nursing station in Carmax on our inReach. They could find our location and come and get us. And we asked them, well, what if we were like in the wilderness when that happened? And they said, well, we would have come and got you with a helicopter, so some places you're close enough that they will come get you if this weather's bad, whatever. So don't rely on it like that. But that's it. You probably will be able to facilitate some kind of evacuation if you have good satellite communication equipment, and if you're mobile enough that you can move to an area where you can be found, or a helicopter or float plane can land, right? The other option is walking out, okay, which is not really an option a lot of the time, but it has been done. You heard of those guys? I don't know. I forget where they're from, Europe somewhere, maybe Finland, or might have been Germany. I forget. But they walked out of a remote river in northern Manitoba. They ended up getting like a crappy canoe, but it's what they could find, and it's smashed apart on a boulder in a rapid. Canoe was destroyed, and they walked out with like hardly any food, something like 100 miles to a road, and they seemed like in pretty good spirits about it. But it was in the paper, it was like, wow, that's impressive, right? Somewhere like the Hood River in Nunavut, where the closest community is something like 300 plus air miles, like the way the crow flies, and there's multiple lakes and rivers to cross along the way. You're not walking there, and you're not surviving there by yourself, right? If I was on the Hess River, yeah, I would have had a chance. In fact, unfortunately, I wouldn't have had any camera gear, so I couldn't have filmed it, but I probably would have given that a shot. I would have, gotten a big fire going, right? Not just a little fire, but a big fire, get all my stuff dried right out. And, I wouldn't have had a tarp. I would have had to been sleeping beside a fire every night. I would have just had my belt knife. It would have been pretty dangerous, but I think I could have walked the 20 miles, or it might have been 20 kilometers. And of course, that's in a straight line. When you're mountains, you're going around through valleys. But I think I would have walked that to the Cannell Road and then just continued walking on the Cannell Road and fording rivers if I had to. I had a dry suit. So I think I personally would have given that a shot. Is it 100% necessary? No, but it would have been a hell of a lot cheaper to get evacuated because someone could have driven to the North Canada Road and picked me up from Whitehorse. And I think I had the ability to walk there. Now, if you're, in Canada, if you are actually injured, so the protocol for injury is like, is it actually life changing? So if anybody remembers that freak accident where I put an axe through the back of my hand, I had an axe strapped to a pack, and I was up north of Lake Superior on the East Puckasaw River, and at a food barrel, I had the pack with the axe on top of the food barrel. And I started walking. I started, doing this portage, hard bushwhack portage, really, really rugged, pouring rain, right? And the axe sheath wasn't one of the sheaths where the handle slides through the sheath and it goes over the axe head. It was one of the ones where it was a Husqvarna axe, and it was a leather sheath that just went over the bit and clipped down. So it got loose from the rain, from the wet, because it was leather, and just got knocked right off on the portage trail. And then what happened was I was walking up to a rock ledge and I wanted to take a break. So to take a break, I just went to push the bag that was on top of my food barrel. I just wanted to push that off so it would, crash land on the ledge, and I could sit, rest the food barrel on the ledge and have a little break. Well, I pushed that bag off, and the axe, which was, through the two grab handles on the food barrel, but there was also a tripod jammed in beside it, also in between the two grab handles. And that sort of allowed the axe to be pushed at a right angle to the pack and sort of wedged it in place. So what happened was I just got super unlucky because the placing of the axe. And as I pushed the bag off, the whole bag came down with the whole weight of the bag. Boom, probably a 65, 70-pound bag. Boom, axe bit first, right on the back of my hand. Gashed it open, blood everywhere. It was messy. Tendons were cut. I still can't flip the bird with this hand. This is me trying to flip. Look, I'm not aiming at you. I can flip it with this hand, but with this hand, I can't. I can do it like in the movies, but that's it. Because I still have that injury from those cut tendons that you're never going to heal. So I somebody that works at search and rescue, a first responder in Canada, said, why didn't you just call when you had that injury? And I'm like, well, what am I going to call the ambulance? Blah, blah, blah. Because I ended up walking out 12K, taking, basic gear and doing a hardcore bushwhack to a mining road, which then we followed a significant distance to meet a driver, because we could have got him to pick us up right where we got out of the bush. But because of our in-reach, he didn't have one. He left. We were in-reaching the other person. They just sent him to where they dropped us off to start the trip. So we had to end up walking, you very rarely see anybody on these roads. So we ended up having to walk, I think, an extra 3 kilometers on this mining road to meet the guy, hand bandaged, bleeding, swollen, throbbing in pain, right? So, these situations happen. Anyways, my point was what the guy said. He's like, if you have an injury that is life changing, permanent, that you could call in an air evac, and they would just charge you the same price for if you called an ambulance to your house on the road, which is $65. And he said, your hand, because that's very much possibly life altering. You might lose, it was, right? He's like, you might lose permanent use of your fingers. He's like, you 100% could have called in an air evac. We would have choppered in there and got you probably out of, I don't know, Wawa or something like that, right? So, keep that in mind. I think, if you're really I'm glad I wouldn't have done that. I was happy walking out, but keep in mind, because a lot of people think, I don't want to put anyone out. I don't want to trouble first responders. Is this really a serious situation? If you're tax paying freaking citizen, this is what these things are here for. We're very lucky to have them in our country. Like for example, in Russia, nobody comes to save you until the money's in the account. You can still get epic air assisted evacuations in Russia, but nobody does anything until they get paid first, right? So the fact that people will come here and do that is pretty good. And a lot of people, again, the psychology thing, just like some people are having a heart attack and they say, oh, am I having a heart? They're embarrassed, or embarrassment is one of them, right? Do you want to admit that you need help, that you're in trouble? Well, when you're up in the north, when you're up in the Arctic, nobody sees it like that, because pretty much everyone who's a hardcore landsman or even semi-hardcore has needed the help of others, has had to been rescued at one time or another in their life. And at the end of the day, no matter how skilled you are out there, right, Mother Nature is going to slam the door, or can slam the door on you, right? And it can be scary. I'm going to talk about another scary, almost survival situation that I ran into when I was in the Arctic archipelago, in the Western Arctic, on a river called the Kujua, not the Kuujjuaq, which is in Arctic Quebec, which is much, much further south. It's the same word, it means big river. It's just the Western Arctic pronunciation compared to the Eastern Arctic pronunciation. And, we're further north than the entire state of Alaska at this point. We're almost up to on parallel, just a little bit south of Banks Island and Sax Harbor on Banks Island, right? And my brother Ted and I just finished canoeing this Arctic river, and we hit the coast, and it was real windy, huge waves crashing on the coast. And we had some loose notes about this area, and it was, big wave. And missionaries built this cabin there because Inuit people used to hang out in this part of Minto Inlet, which is another inlet, not nearly as big as Prince Albert Sound, but north of Prince Albert Sound, north of Uluwatu. And they used to go there, in the spring and hunt seals and camp out there for large amounts of time. So missionaries, I'm going to say in the 1940s, 50s, built cabin there to convert Inuit people. And now it's just abandoned, and the roof is leaking like crazy. There's a little bed in it that was just in the one corner that wasn't like leaking, and it was pouring rain, pouring, just streams of water everywhere. And me and Ted are just in the little corner like, It's doing this for days on end. And at a certain point, you just start to wonder, is this just how it is here all the time? Is this just always how the weather is? And this is a good lesson, again, that again relates back to psychology. And in this case, this is what I think is psychology anyways. And in this case, this is how not to get yourself in a survival situation in the first place, right? So this isn't just so much like, okay, now I'm scared. Now I'm in a survival situation, or I might be lost. Okay, don't panic. And okay, I know to the south of me, there's a road. Okay, I know, stop and think. That's why it's always good. You want to bring a map, but even if you can look at a map and have some idea what's around you. Okay, to the south of me, there's a road. To the north of me is a lake. If I hit the lake shore, well, then I could walk along the lake shore all the way, and I'd get a cabin, and maybe there's a phone in there or a radio. Or if I continue on the lake shore, it might be a long way, but I can get back to a road, right? And it's this kind of rational thinking and just, okay, two and two together. Well, west to me, I know there's a bush trail. And you know what? If I can look at this big white pine here, and I know that the branches on a white pine tree point southeast because the prevailing winds blow from the northwest. So I can use that tree right there. And there's a lot of white pines around. Probably never going to be a perfect white pine to tell you direction when you need one, but good chance you'll see one if you're in Northern Ontario or a lot of parts within the range of the white pine, right? So and you wait for the North Star to come up, right? You can know where that is, and you can get your wits about you, and you can go, and you can get back to the road. If you lose your bearing, find it again. And I remember my uncle Russ, he was in the Army, and he used to take us out on these adventures when we were kids, when we were young, and he thought I was just like, he was trying to teach me how to use a compass, and I'm like, Uncle Russ really knows how to use a compass. Why are we always getting lost out there? So like literally, and if my mom or my aunt are, pretty tough cookies, but if they kind of start freaking out when it's dark and they're with their little kids in the woods, and Uncle Russ didn't care. And what I realized is he wasn't really walking a bearing. He was just walking around the bush, and he knew what was, there was some trail, or he knew you hit the lake if he walked east. He knew you hit the hydroslash if he walked north. And so he didn't really need to know where he was until it was time to get back to camp, right? And so he would, he wouldn't be freaking out at all. And what I realized afterwards was that he would say, well, we'll make a little fire and we can camp out here and we can eat these mushrooms or, whatever. And, you'd have a 22 with them. And he said, we could, if we had to, we could, he always taught us never to kill a porcupine to eat, to leave them for people that are actually starving in the bush. But what I realized is he didn't really think that it was that scary or that dangerous for us as relatively young kids to spend a night in the bush, sleep by a fire with a bough bed, maybe miss dinner, and find our way home in the morning. And looking back on it, what a great lesson. It really isn't that dangerous. As long as hypothermia is not a concern, it's just a scary discomfort, and so that I feel like that kind of taught me a lot about this kind of thing. So back to the Arctic. Ted and I are in this old missionary cabin. We find a polar bear skull. There's like sand dollars, I think, on the beach. We find a polar bear skull with like teeth marks in it, like another polar bear killed it. There's whale bones there. It's just this wild place. And to get out of there, we had to paddle, I think it was like 130 kilometers along the coast to get to Ulukaktok. Ulukaktok, which is actually in the Northwest Territories. And the thing is, we had to paddle past this stretch of giant cliffs on Minto Inlet. We'd been warned, and just like talking to a guy on the plane was like, we were telling about our trip. He was terrified for us about these cliffs because if you're paddling on the ocean, we're talking about the freaking Arctic Ocean, the Beaufort Sea here, and you're paddling along, you run into weather, and there's cliffs for 30 kilometers stretch of cliffs. You can't get to shore, right? And that means you can't get to shore until you paddle to the end of the cliffs because there's just cliffs, and then there's waves rebounding off of them. And if you paddle close to the cliffs, you just get smashed on the cliffs, right? So Ted and I, let's see. I'll just look at some comments coming in. Yeah, awesome. Thanks everybody for the comments. I'm reading the odd one here. I'll get to some more questions and stuff later. Let's see. 8:50. Yeah. So in about 10 minutes, I've been going on for almost an hour. So about 10 minutes, I'll jump into some questions and that. So anyway, so Ted and I just decide that we should go. We've been waiting there for 5 days. And when you're waiting in one place for the weather to break for 5 days, it feels like 500 days. Like it feels like way longer because you think, will the weather ever break? Is it always like this here? And we're thinking about the research we did in tempestuous seas. And, we're just like, this is just how it is. Like, we better just go because it's now or never. Well, that was a terrible decision, right? What a way to learn a lesson, But we just were too antsy. So we started paddling. We actually, before we even got to the cliffs, we found a really cool old Inuit historic site that had been documented. And then we kind of were thinking, the waves were big, but we were partially blocked. And we're kind of thinking, well, if we get out by these cliffs, right, and it's bad, we can turn around and come back. So, whatever. Turns out not the case. So we start paddling beside these towering cliffs, and the waves are huge. Okay. Like they're swells, so they're not super abrupt, so they're not breaking over a canoe. But our travel between top of the wave and bottom was 8 feet. So we're on 8 foot swell in the howling wind, paddling as hard as we can, and then it gets worse. And it's blasting wind, and we're literally giving it all we can. I'm a little more confident just beast paddling on my right. It was so sketchy that I was afraid to paddle. I'm more confident paddling on my right because that's my whitewater side, and I can brace better. And I was scared, a little scared to paddle on my left just because I couldn't brace as well, but I had to because I was getting so exhausted. And at that point, we realized that there's no way we could turn around because we would be forced into uncontrollable surfs by the waves, and the tailwind would be so strong we'd be going so fast, and we'd be forced into the uncontrollable surfs, and we'd breach and dump. And at this point, we were beside these cliffs. If we managed to swim to the cliffs and not get crushed in them by the waves, and there's also slop or rebound waves coming off these cliffs, we might be able to climb up them and like hold on to the cliffs. I had my satellite phone in a dry bag around a strap to me, a survival kit, everything. You might be able to say, hey, like call my mom and be like, we love you over the blasting wind, but you're done. You're done for. So we ended up, thanks a lot, Jeff. Appreciate it. Jeff Coons there, a little donation. Anyway, so so we end up finding a place to take out after this is going on for way too long. And it's basically where a creek comes down through the cliffs. Like there's a deep valley and it comes out into the ocean, right? So there was a little place there where it wasn't sheer cliffs, a little kind of rocky, small beach. But as we get into there, one of the waves, there seem to be waves going multiple directions, but kind of surfs us into shore. And there's waves crashing on us like this. It surfs us in, crashes us onto the beach. We jump out, but our canoe's loaded. And we're trying to pull our canoe up on shore, but the waves are crashing on our canoe, lifting it up, smashing it. And we have to pull open our spray deck and start ripping bags up and throwing them on shore as fast as we could, but it was too late and our canoe got damaged. So we were using a pack boat, which is a folding canoe. Now, this is much like the alley folding canoe that you see Ted using on the Hood River, just like the North American version of it. So, it's made with basically larger size tent poles over, a vinyl type of skin. And so the skin was torn like a patch this big. The chime rods, the poles were snapped, broken in half, not seaworthy. And we managed to get this thing out. And the next day, we just realized, man, we don't have a ton of food left. At this point, we've been out there for, over a month. And we're starting to think if this storm keeps going, like we're going to be we're thinking we saw a rabbit. We had a gun with us, but no fish were biting. So we would have been like having a hunt. Hopefully we could have seen some geese. Speaking of which, there was the only place to get fresh water, because we're on the ocean, where we were held up here, was a puddle that had goose poop in it. So not a ton of goose poop, but we're literally pumping our water while we're staring at goose poop, right? So we ended up fixing up our canoe. We had like a tarp pole because there's no trees anywhere there. So we brought some extra poles that we could like rig our tarps with. So we took one of those apart and we splinted the snap chine rod in the pack boat with zip ties, right? And then the pack boat actually comes with a really good patching kit. So we put multiple patches on it, including one that was about this long to fix this huge tear. And the next day we actually had to, oh, why, thank you very much, BB. Very much appreciated for the donation there. So the next morning, thinking back on it, why would we have gone anywhere the next day? But what we decided that, okay, there looks like there's a little cove, a break in the cliffs where you literally paddle through a gap with sheer walls on either side into a little bay that would be protected. And we just thought if we could make it to that sheltered bay, maybe a boat could come pick us up there. Because it looked like a big enough boat, might have been able to guess, thinking who the hell is going to take a boat out in this weather. But we thought maybe there's a big boat in Uluwatu. Good question to have asked beforehand of the trip. Research what size of boats are in town. Anyway, so because we couldn't eat when we're paddling in these huge waves, because the waves are so big, we need to be beast paddling. There's nowhere to pull over and eat. We needed to eat as much as we could, but to maximize our calories. So we ended up having to load our canoe while standing in the water, and the waves weren't coming on direct, but they were sideways breaking us like this. And we had to eat our breakfast while on top of our canoe, while holding onto the canoe and holding on. And we ate getting in these calories. I think we just ate raw oatmeal packets without water and some power bars and just powered it as much as we could, and then jumped in our canoe and went so we'd have that maximum amount of energy, because when you run out of gas out there, you can get into trouble. And again, crazy paddling, huge swells, even sketchier than the day before. And then, Ted's like, what are we doing out here? And then, I forget what carnivore stock. I forget exactly. We made it. We couldn't make it to the cove. We couldn't even make it close to the cove. So we ended up having to do another emergency takeout. Fortunately, we managed to find another spot. And, we ended up climbing up these cliffs and looking out. I wish I took a picture. I was just too scared. And we did a recording. We were doing a recording journal. We took some footage, but this is back when they had DVD burning cameras, and the thing got corrupted, and we got some footage, but not even from there. And so we were doing a recording journal, on this, and we looked at this view of Minto Inlet, and the weather. You still have a photo of these cliffs somewhere. It's just unreal, breathtaking, and so foreboding. And we managed to call the RCMP office, the Mountie in Uluwatu. And he's just like, oh my God, you guys are out there. He's like, all the planes have been grounded. There's nobody in town who can come get you. The largest boat in town is a 60-horse Lund, which is just an aluminum boat, probably 18 feet long at the most. He's like, no boats are going out. He's like, you're going to just have to sit tight and hope for the weather breaks. Call me tomorrow. I'll give you a weather update. He seemed pretty concerned for us, right? So me and Ted were like, oh my God, wow. And he said, yeah, the closest thing again, he said, would be the Herc in Winnipeg. Again, which wouldn't really help us because he would just, they couldn't land, right? So anyways, so we waited out, and the weather breaks. I think we waited another whole day, and the weather breaks is much better. And Ted and I paddled the remaining 70. How far was it? I don't know how far it was. I want to say we paddled straight for 36 hours. We stopped and slept for 4 hours along the way. And when we were sleeping, we got woken up. So we made it past the cliffs, right? And when we were sleeping, we got woken up. It never gets dark there at this time of year. And there's surf crashing on the beach, but we were woken up by gunshots. Ted's like, gunshots, I didn't even hear him. Ted heard him. So we climb out of the tent and we see this Inuit couple who I stayed in touch with for a long time, Pat Ikwahoak, who's a famous Inuk artist. His stuff is in museums in Old Town Montreal and Queens Quay Terminal in Toronto and stuff. And anyway, so he said, "Are you Chris?" And I'm like, "Chris, this what?" And Ted was talking about, because there's these other two Australians that were trying to do this unsupported walk across Victoria Island, pulling these huge carts, and they were on the other side of Minto Inlet. And I guess Pat and Jean Equahoa, they hadn't heard that anybody else was out there, right? And so they were kind of heading towards, across almost 100 kilometers across the mouth of Minto Inlet, where we were on the southern side. And they said, "Are you Chris?" And Ted said, "No, we're not Chris. That we're not the Australians, no." And they just looked puzzled. They're like, "Well, who the heck are you guys then?" So they turned off and they just drove into the horizon with this Lund aluminum boat filled with jerry cans. Jean had a beluga whale hunting spear with her. And so we said, "Let's get up and let's go." So we jumped in the canoe. We kept paddling. Sure enough, Pat and Jean come back past us, and they couldn't believe how far we'd made it. And they said, "Hey, do you want help? We can give you a drive the rest of the way." Or they couldn't take all our stuff. "We'll take some of your stuff." And we said, "You know what? No, we want to make it on our own." They said, "Okay, well, come look us up in town." Anyways, we ended up making it to Uluhakto, met up with Pat and Jean, ate a bunch of country food there, which was amazing, traded, got a muskox pelt from them, camped there, super cool. And, the Ted and I listened once we were back and once we were safe. Now, I've heard of people in the same situation crying, actually being overcome with tears. But then me and Ted were in the tent, and we listened, after you're in this crazy survival situation, fearing for your life. Me and Ted were back in the tent, and we listened to the recording of ourselves and listened to the fear in our voices. And we were laughing so hard. Like, we were absolutely hysterical. This is probably the hardest I've ever laughed in my entire life. And because it was such a relief, but we were just laughing at ourselves and how scared we sounded and how kind of embarrassed we sounded. And, reflecting on the whole thing, it's like this, the psychology of the whole thing, us deciding to leave when we shouldn't, us being scared, embarrassed, and reflecting back on it. It all was just a very good lesson and just an unbelievable experience. And, the story of Uluhakto goes on. We ended up going back and visiting Pat and Jean on a snowmobile expedition and a bunch of stuff like that. But I'm done my tour. I'm going to get into this Tread Lightly. So Tread Lightly is another beer by Muskoka Brewery. It's a light lager, and so it's a 4%, but it is the best light beer like ever. It's like you won't believe that it's a light beer. I'll put it. So it's a cool logo too. Look at that. Anyways, yeah. So let's jump into some questions, some Q&As. I know I didn't really get into survival skills. Kind of when I started this topic, when I said, "Hey, I'm going to talk about wilderness survival," I was thinking I was going to start talking about some specific skills, but they say, to speak about like what you know. And I've read a lot of stuff about wilderness survival skills, and I could go on to all the things I've talked about a bunch of other times before that I learned from alone, all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to relate it to, wilderness trips, what can happen. And I think the kind of like deeper underlying thing that goes with it, and just kind of tell some near survival stories of my own. So I hope everybody really enjoyed that. So if you have any questions about survival skills, tips about survival skills, or just any questions that are outdoor related, I'd love to hear them, and and just try to connect with as many people as possible. I have probably another 45 minutes, hour that I can do the Q&A. This is like my favorite part. Hey, Tori, can you field some questions or no? Could you try? So what happens is that I have another screen here, and I can see all the questions. Oh, thanks a lot, Jeff. Jeff Coons there made a little donations. Since the Hess, what updates have you made on your body survival kit? Do you carry pain meds and antibiotics on your person in the bush? I carry pain meds. Sometimes there's like a little bit like leftover, like Tylenol 3 or some sort of narcotic painkiller that my brother or somebody in the family has like had but didn't take the rest of them, and they give them to us. So I don't know if those are like what's the word? I don't know if those might be expired, but you can take Tylenol ones with you. I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't typically carry pain meds in my survival kit. But I think since the Hess, I made sure my survival kit was a little better. That trip was a little rushed, the going on it, and I didn't really have a really good, waterproof survival kit. After I dumped, it was like stuff was wet in there, which isn't ideal. So I think making sure that survival kit is like triple Ziploc bag with some duct tape over the top, or in a small dry bag or in two small dry bags, like just make sure that that's waterproofed. Another good idea, if you can find a fanny pack that'll fit it, would be to fit your entire survival kit in a bot pot. Because what a bot pot is it's a pot and it's a water bottle. So it's a 2-in-1. It has a little fire rubberized, but fire retardant ring around the top. So when you screw it tight, it won't leak, but you can take that off and boil water in it. It's awesome. I actually had one for the hiking period when we were on alone, and it's just a great little thing. You can use a piece of snare wire around the top and hang it on a stick. And that way you have something that's waterproof to store your survival kit in. And then B, you have a pot to boil and a water bottle to transport water. One of the most overlooked things when it comes to survival gear is just containers, right? It's very challenging to make containers out of birch bark and roots and stuff like that. So just having a container that you can use, bot pots are stainless steel. You can even dig with it. You can carry hot rocks in it to then use to boil water, let's say in a hollowed out log, and use it for whatever your mind can come up with, right? So I think that's the waterproofing is the main thing since the Hess River. Tim, thank you very much, man. Wow, Tim, that's super friendly. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for the donation. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's celebrate the first super on live stream. Right on, man. Wow. Way to go, Tim. I've been in close proximity to grizzly bears and black bears. However, polar bears are a very different animal. How do you sleep in polar bear territory? What precautions do you take? So the guy, Pat Ikpahook, that I was talking about, who's an Inuit landsman, he's still with us, fortunately. He's in a nursing home in Cambridge Bay now. But at the time, he'd harvested over 70 polar bears in his life. He comes from an area on the Dolphin and Union Strait, Copper Inuit people that actually survived on polar bear as their staple through the winter months. And this is before guns. This is with bows made with sinew and hide glue and muskox horns and arrows, and they would hunt polar bears and eat them. So he very much ate these polar bears and shared them with people in his community. But he said he only ever saw one angry bear. Another time, I've heard other people seeing bears. Those other guys, the two guys named Chris, the Aussies that were on the north side of Minto Inlet. I read their trip report. They saw a polar bear there, and it ran away from them, probably because Pat Ikpahoak lives in the area. But so it was scared of people. But I have heard stories of polar bears following people. Hap Wilson has a story on the copper mine about a polar bear following. I've heard polar bears sneaking up on people, and a lot of stories about them covering up their black noses because they know their nose is black and they won't camouflage in the snow, and they'll cover up their noses. Ted and I had a sow and two cubs do a circle, do a loop around the shack that we were staying at the mouth of the Churchill River on Hudson's Bay. So I think, and then, you have my Baffin Island trek, right? Where it's in, the late winter or spring up there, you don't think it's like spring, like raining and stuff. It's still like minus 30, but the polar bears, the female polar bears are coming out of hibernation on land. They're coming out into sea ice. They have their cubs with them. They're young, they're hungry, and it's a pretty dangerous time for bears. So what I did was I took something called an ice bear alarm, and you hear people taking like electric fences. I also bring a shotgun, a 12 gauge shotgun with armed with slugs. I carry bear spray and bear bangers too. In Labrador, the bear guides use bear bangers regularly to scare away polar bears. If you're going to be in Labrador, where there's still a strong polar bear numbers, but not as much pack ice, not as much iceberg for them to be out on the ice floes, I think in that situation, you really want to take more precautions than typically. You have mandatory to have the gun. In fact, in the self-governing area there, they won't even let you travel. They wouldn't even let us travel through that their settlement lands without a firearm, right? So you want to know how to use the gun too, practice with it, right? But I have something called the ice bear alarm, which is essentially a bunch of stakes, and there's a little pin and a pin that sits in a little trigger mechanism. You pull back, you sit the pin in, they stick into the ground like this, and you make a fence around you with essentially tripwires, and those pins and those little mechanisms are loaded with 12 gauge blanks, right? And so they go boom. If anything comes in that perimeter, they make a loud noise. Maybe two of them go off. And I've heard of people setting up 2 layers. And when you pack them down, it's not huge. It's a lot smaller than packing an electric fence. Animals are scared of loud noises, right? Especially when it just surprises them. I have seen one picture of a polar bear going right over the electric fence into the tent and killing someone. So yeah, polar bears they're the only bears that typically, more on average, will just like hunt you and try to eat you. But at the same time, there's varying it's different in different areas. And other than the Labrador coast, just carry a gun, but I wouldn't let it hold you back. Just be smart about it. Yeah, that's all I would say. And seeing a polar bear, me and my brother have seen over 10. And it's just incredible. It's so cool. Even the females, they're like the size of like 4 black bears. They're like the size of 2 fridges stacked on top of each other. Ted and I once saw a polar bear swim underwater for over 200 meters. And this isn't even as far as they could swim underwater, right? And you read about these things. Polar bears can swim underwater, and you're like, oh, that's cool. But then when you actually see it, you're like, wow, it's like way cooler to actually see that almost tangible. I don't know if you want to touch it, but anyways, I hope that helps. Let's see more questions. Thoughts on Dick Proenneke? Dick Proenneke is awesome. I think that there's a bit of a legend of Dick Proenneke, and then the real story of Dick Proenneke. And Dick Proenneke was never trying to tell anything false. But if you read Dick Proenneke's actual journals, you'll see that the legend of Dick Proenneke is different than what he really did for the most part. Not, in some cases wildly different, but he himself is a super authentic person. But he became sort of a legend, not quite like Mufferaw Joe, but so if you actually buy Dick Proenneke's own written words and his journals, then you get some stuff like the media interviews, like Dick Proenneke has lived here alone for 40 years. Well, that's not really true. That's just like kind of media hype. So there's some things that aren't true, but for the most part, yeah, the guy's amazing. And he's like the first guy to do this stuff, man. He's like, Survivor Man was the first guy to have a TV show, a self-shot TV show about survival. Well, Dick Proenneke was doing that kind of stuff way before. So I think we all owe him something and perpetuating that dream. And Dick's his passion for the outdoors. So he's a guy that can go live in the wilderness. He can harmoniously live off the land and still, love the animals and be happy that the caribou survived another hunting season. And he could look at the big, scary wolverine and see how they're just playful, like otters that they're related to in a lot of occasions, right? So I really appreciate that aspect of his outlook towards nature, because you get some of these people, especially from his generation, they'll charge you, you got to shoot it. Oh, fisher cat, they'll charge you. Oh, you got to shoot them and keep walking. You have that attitude that exists out there, and it's really nice to see somebody that doesn't have that attitude. So there's my thoughts. I don't bother carrying a gun on the island. A bear spray is good enough. Yeah, you know what? A lot of people might call me a granola head for saying this, but bear spray, if you look at a study done through some like the 1950s on bear attacks in Alaska, bear spray is actually more effective than a firearm statistically. So I didn't make that up. You can hum and haw about that if you want. Do I need to be taking a shotgun on the Hood River? Yeah, probably. On the Teslin River in the Yukon, I mean, I have the kids there. There's grizzly bears. Someone was killed in the Yukon by a grizzly bear and all that. But the answer is no. Yeah, I don't need one, right? So yeah, you don't have to carry a gun all the time at all. Hi, Jim. I'm going for a 2-month canoe trip, 55 days this summer, up north in Canada. Any tips for physical prep and psychological prep? Yeah, I would say let the fear lead to over planning, right? So when you're scared of something, just what am I scared of? I'm scared of this. Okay, well, how might that happen? How can I be prepared for that to happen, right? And get into that solution. For physical prep, I would say just honestly, the most important thing out there, I don't know how much portaging you're doing, but just cardio. If you're doing your portaging and you're not doing cardio, you're gonna die out. You're still get it done, but you're gonna be way slower. You're gonna be exhausted. You won't be having nearly as much fun. The odds on you injuring yourself are way harder. If you just bust out a half an hour of exercise a day, if you can't do a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and you do that, that is super, super helpful. Leg exercises really help for the portaging as well. And, shoulders, core, core definitely helps you with the paddling, grip strength, all these things. But number one is cardio, all day. Just that's what I would say. You hit the treadmill hard for a half an hour every day. You're gonna be crushing it out there by the time your canoe trip comes. Bear spray is effective till it's not. Yeah, I've heard some stories. I heard a story in Algonquin, friends of ours. The guy emptied a can of bear spray on the bear, and it didn't budge, which is just crazy. Good advice, Jim. Thank you. Depending on the range potential of a bear on that day, right? Yeah. I camped for years being scared of them. I set up trail cams. Holy crap, there's bears, cougars, and wolves. And all those years, nothing bad happened. I think that's the answer. And that's why they say get out there, on a 10-day trip. Because after 5 days, you're going to be like, I haven't been eaten yet, so I'm probably not going to get eaten anymore. So I think just doing a longer trip is a good way to like permanently get over your fear of bears. And, everybody knows the statistics. Oh, you're more likely to get killed on the way to the put-in than by bears in the bush. 100% true. But, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to think completely rational. If they have a fear, they might think my fear is irrational and still be scared. So I think the only thing that gets you not scared is just experience not having bear issues. And you know what? You won't have them. Just don't be dumb. Don't be leaving your food all over the place and stuff like that, right? Go for hikes, portaging a canoe with a backpack on to get in shape. That's a good idea. Yeah, like I mean, that might look a little funny in the suburbs, but yeah, just do other smaller trips, right? That have a few portages, challenge yourself. That's probably the best way to do it. Unfortunately, we can't just canoe trip every day to plan for our canoe trips. But yeah, doing a run, with a pack on, that will really strengthen your back, and it won't feel near as heavy when it comes to it. They're usually more scared of you than anything. Alaska Girl 618. So true. So every time I've seen, except for a couple times, one time things got a little interesting, but everything ended fine. But every time I've seen a bear in the bush, it's been so scared of me that it shit itself and bolted, right? So one time I was ground hunting and I just see a little flash up there and a patch of black this big and the rushing away and the branches moving. So I'm like, oh, that was a bear. Didn't know I was there. Walked up, caught wind of me, bolted, right? I walked over there, big steaming pile of poop. Another time, we were walking through these raspberry canes trying to get to this backcountry lake. The portage trail had been all logged over, and the black bears were so into eating all these raspberries they didn't hear us coming. But again, I just hear and just see the bushes shaking, maybe a patch of black, fresh poop. Happened twice, just trying to get into that. So scared it pooed itself. On the Stikine River in Alaska, though, I remember one time a bear sitting like this. It was probably well fed. There's salmon and stuff in that river. But sitting there like this, and it's bending these branches down like this, just like a person, and eating the berries off. And my buddy Ari, my cousin Brad, paddle up to this bear, probably a little closer than recommended, and it's up probably, about 8 feet up on the bank. And it looks down at them like this. And it just goes back to eating the berries. Didn't even care they were there. So yeah, but from my experience, yeah, you don't even see them because they smell you coming. They run like hell to get you out of there. Who needs to work out? Just go prospecting. Shout out from the Philippines. Cool. Thanks for jumping in here. There's a bear behind me. What? Oh, you're just joking. Sleep with fish in the tent. Bill, that's not a good idea. Let's see. Alaska Girl 618. Poop. Okay, let's see. Starting my off-grid setup. Oh, starting my off-grid setup. Bought a Bluetti because of your videos. I actually just went up to my cabin. I had to cut a bunch of firewood. I did a little deer hunting up there. I need to find this trapline trail behind me. I found it's like 100 meters behind me. I didn't have time to cut a trail to it. But I brought the big Bluetti, the EBA3 and the AC, whatever, the big inverter up there. And I'm like, this is already amazing. I have it just so I can run. I don't have one of the permanent solar panels. They're portable, but I have, so I could just run them right out the window, and just charge them right there. And between that and the propane lighting and stove, it's just awesome. And in the summer, running the propane lights gets really hot, so just having the Bluetti, I don't know if I'm not going to wire the place for the Bluetti, but I'm just going to use it to charge like really awesome lanterns. It's going to be perfect. So I'm glad that you're liking it too. Jim Baird, been waiting for a brotherly scrap over oatmeal or rapids, maybe in the future. We'll see. Why do you not use a double-sided paddle more often? As a kayaker, it feels more efficient. Yeah, like why do I not play ringette instead of ice hockey? It's way more efficient, right? Yeah, I do use one when I'm soloing on big water and waves and wind and stuff like that, especially when there's other people that double blade. Ted and I used one on our Algonquin trout fishing trip this summer, and we used one in northern Manitoba. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just personal preference. The kayak paddle splashes around. It's more motion. It doesn't really feel. It doesn't have the same feel. It's louder. It's there's just things about it I don't like. Just like I like playing ice hockey with a puck more than I like playing ringette. Right? Why don't play ringette? It's so much easier to keep the ring on your stick than it is to keep a puck on a hockey stick. It's just the sport that I enjoy. And paddling a canoe with a double blade, it's not really canoeing to the same extent. It's still awesome though. So who cares? It doesn't feel like canoeing. It has a totally different feel, but it's fun as hell, especially when you do have to hit those big waves. Then you go back, like on these huge lakes in Manitoba, you go back to a single blade and you just like, I don't feel nearly as safe with this out here. Paddling into some of those headwinds, kayaking, we'll call it. I don't know. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun too. So I don't want to knock it. When is Ted going to be on the podcast? I don't know. I texted him yesterday. I'm like, Ted, come on my podcast. I got Frank Wolf. He's showing up here tomorrow to jump on my podcast. I'm like, Ted, Frank Wolf's coming. When are you going to go on my podcast? And he just like responded with something completely different. So I don't know. I can't get an answer out of this guy, but we'll see. Or fight over the double-sided paddle. Yeah. Yeah, Ted's trying to get me to duct tape paddles. Ted's trying to get me to, Jim, just duct tape two paddles together and use a double blade, and it's way faster. He's literally been trying to get me to do that for 16 effing years. And I'm just like, no. And finally, I'm just like, I'm not duct taping paddles together anymore, man. Shut up. Just shut up. Anyways, what a Canuckian. Frank Wolf. Yeah, Frank Wolf's going to be at my place tomorrow. Is there a reason you don't carry a sidearm? Yeah, it's pretty much illegal to carry a sidearm in Canada. You can get provincially, I probably could get a special permit, but now I probably can't because they came out with all these rules about it you can't, because I don't own any handguns, but you can't buy or sell or trade any handguns in Canada. So if you have them, you're stuck with them until you die unless you destroy them. But you can, like, let's say you're a trapper, you work in mineral exploration. There's a very rigorous, it's called wilderness carry. So you can get a wilderness carry permit. I don't know if I would be able to get one in my line of work, probably, but I think it it would take some finagling because I think I'd have to be a prospector. But it's it's such an enormous amount of added worry and bother and stuff like that in Canada. In general, it's just illegal, in Canada. So that's why. Good question, though, because I would rather just carry a 357 Magnum than a shotgun. I know it's not going to do nearly the same thing, but again, statistically, the handguns are as effective as long guns in bear protection. And the reason for that is because they're always on you. They're not as good. 357 Magnum, somebody said, the thing is, if you're carrying a 357 Magnum for grizzly bear protection, you better file the front sight down. And the guy said, why? I said, well, that way it won't hurt you as bad when the bear shoves it up your ass. So I don't know how important they are. You're supposed to break the bear down and shoot at the joints. You have to be very good, very proficient with the gun. But I think the reason is the handguns, they're on you, right? So you carry a shotgun, it's over there and you're here. It's on the other side of camp. The bear comes in, you don't have time to get to your gun, even though, yeah, obviously a 12 gauge shotgun or, 30-06 or heavy rifle is going to be a hell of a lot better if you're shooting a bear at point blank than a handgun. Unfortunately, it's equally as effective because it's not always on you, and neither statistically in Alaska, anyways, are as effective as bear spray. So if you want to go and check it out, you can read this full study on Field and Stream. Actually, did an article covering that article. So I'm not making this stuff up. Do you ever practice turning over a canoe with kids on board? That doesn't sound like practice. That sounds like the real thing. But no, I haven't. But that actually might be a lot of fun. We do swim with them with their life jackets on and stuff like that too. But might be a lot of fun and good practice to say to just do a dry run or whatever. So, but no, I've never practiced that. Yeah, I'm a prospector, and if it was easy for us to have sidearms, you'd see it all the time, and there'd be a lot more prospector all of a sudden. That's funny. Yeah, yeah. You have to. Yeah, it's if you're from Canada, like for example, I know a trapper right in my area that has his wilderness carry permit, right? But you have to. It can't be concealed. So if you're wearing a parka, you have to wear a belt on top of your parka, and the sidearm has to be visible on top of it. And then the parkas like this, and it's just that there's just a lot of rules, and it's not easy. In some places, like in the Yukon, it's going to be a lot easier than in other places, as my understanding. I've always thought that a mini handheld flamethrower would be a great bear deterrent. Mini handheld flamethrower is good, but have you ever just thought learning jiu-jitsu? What do you use for footwear canoeing? That's a great question. And there's so many answers. I don't think anybody knows, but my footwear, has kind of changed over the years. What I did before is I took like an NRS work boot. I don't know if they make them anymore, but they're sort of like a SWAT team boot looking thing that's got drains just above the sole at the bottom. So you're not walking around with your feet full of water. And then I would actually glue the replacement felt soles that fly fishermen use. So if you buy a wading boot, fly fishermen, their felt soles wear out, and they'll just buy felt soles, glue them back onto their worn out ones. So I put those on these better water shoes, and that gives amazing traction on slippery rocks and logs. If you're going to be doing a lot of lining, I highly recommend it. The felt soles, they can transport invasive species. So in some states are actually illegal. And now fly fishing boots have a different kind of really soft rubber traction. Some of them, including ones called corkers, you can flip between felt and the soft rubber one. The soft rubber ones aren't nearly as good for wading in streams, but they're better for walking on land. And so eventually what I ended up doing was I'm like, well, why don't I just buy the wading boots? So I've been wearing a pair of Sims wading boots. And actually, now I have a pair of Chota wading boots, which are even better because they're more durable. They're super lightweight. They protect your feet against sharp rocks when you're walking. Sometimes your foot crams in between two rocks. They don't get horribly hurt. They drain, and that's great. And then oftentimes I'll wear like on cold spring trips, like on brook trout fishing trips, where I'm wading a lot, where I'm climbing over beaver dams and whatever. I might wear hip waders. Just like they come up to here to keep the top rolled down though. And those have a neoprene sock. So it's essentially a neoprene sock in a wading boot. So essentially I'm dressing like a fly fisherman, and that works great. I've seen people late season, wearing, or you wear your dry suit bottoms, which are you wear your dry suits at Gore-Tex socks. In the Yukon, I saw a bunch of guys wearing muck boots. Now, muck boots, if they get wet, you're kind of hooped. They're very hard to dry. The way you dry them is with a hot rock that you heat up. It's the best way to dry them, but they're warm and you can wade in water. But and even wearing tinglies, I think, or tlingies, like galoshes, really high galoshes, which are also a great thing to use in like late winter, early spring when the snow starts kind of melting and getting slushy. And you don't want your, like, let's say sorels or whatever to get wet. You just use those rubber boot, like outer shoes with the warm liner inside them, and you just discard the outer layer of your pack boots, and they're amazing. So the only thing is, you get water in your boat, like if it's dumping rain or if you're running rapids and you're kneeling, water spilling in your boat, water is going to get into those boots. So I wouldn't ever recommend doing that for a whitewater trip, but just wearing neoprene socks in cold weather in your wading shoes is going to get pretty chilly. So, and if you're doing a whitewater trip with chilly water, I'd go with, the chest waders. If you're not, I'd do that, or the muck boots. I hope that helps. It's also a misnomer that if you dump and you have rubber boots on, first of all, muck boots are pretty tight. They're not a typical rubber boot, but it's also not true that the rubber boots drag you down or chest waders drag you down. I've dumped it with chest waders on, and what happens is the water pressure from the outside squeezes them so tight that hardly any water even gets into them at all. And people say, well, if water gets into them, it's going to drag you down. Well, the thing is that the water is not heavier than the water outside of it, right? So there's no heavier water inside. The water is the same weight as the water outside, so it can't drag you down. Now, try to rubber boots is a disaster. So that's maybe what someone thought, because someone can swim, they drown. Someone thought, oh, the boots drag them down. Yeah, they're very hard to swim in. Neoprene waders are nice, but bulky and can get warm if it's not cold. Yeah, I have neoprene. So I have like a Gore-Tex wader, a breathable wader with neoprene socks. I wouldn't recommend a full neoprene wader. If you are wearing a 7mm wetsuit, your feet get cold. Cool, like a steamer suit, I think. Water displaces water, exactly. Same thing with waders, yeah. I've been wearing a $30 pair of waders for 4 seasons now. I wear 2 pairs of socks and use foot warmers fishing in the river in December. What a great invention foot warmers are. Like, they're not super expensive. They work for minimum 4 hours. When I go deer hunting, I take a whole bunch of them. I swap them out once, twice a day, no problems, and amazing for kids too, for their hands and feet. Great idea. How many packets of oatmeal do you generally pack for your trip? A 3 oatmeal day is standard. So 3 times the number of days. But sometimes I'm like, Ted was like, I'm starting to take 4 oatmeals. Like sometimes I feel like my breakfasts aren't enough. So I'm thinking I might start bumping this up to 4 oatmeals. And I think that way, just as well, for everybody that likes watching my videos, obviously your favorite part out of everything is me eating oatmeal. And so I think if I eat 4 packs, I could just really stretch out those scenes and get a lot more subscribers because of it. Are you aware of the downsides of oatmeal? The downsides of oatmeal. No, not really. I got a Weddy commercial. Let's see. Oh, a lot of comments coming in, everybody. Thank you. How do you tolerate the flies and mosquitoes? I thought we had it bad in Wisconsin until I found your channel. Wisconsin might be comparable to where I live in Northern Ontario. But yeah, in the far north or like in the north, some places like the Yukon in general probably isn't as bad as Northern Ontario, where there's a lot more water and a lot more swamps. Like the Hudson's Bay lowlands are the second largest wetland in the world next to Finland. But honestly, I think the tip I give you for the flies is just fake it till you make it. Eventually you'll gain a mental and physical immunity to them. And by mental, sometimes there's been a lot of flies around you and you're thinking they're all there and you're like getting all squirrely about it. And then you see one fly and you're like, get him away, get him away. And it's like, if you stop and just look around, you're like, okay, there's actually just one mosquito. The rest are all in your head. And that's like somebody bugging you, like the term bugging you. It's like bugs bouncing off of you and driving you crazy. And eventually you just go, bah. So you just stay calm, pretend that the bugs don't bother you. That's what I did. I was just like, well, bugs don't bother me. And and really on the inside, I'm like, ah, but I'm just like, and then slowly that became kind of true. I wouldn't recommend this story. My uncle once told me, well, you have to make an offering to the bugs, right? I'm like, what? He's like, well, just go out there in your undies and sit in the bush at mosquito feeding hour and just let hundreds of them bite you. So I actually did that. And he started making an offering. And then once you've given to them, they won't want to take because they appreciate that. Well, of course, that's not really true. But what is true is that I literally just sat there and let 200 mosquitoes bite me. And I just kind of got immune to it and just stopped worrying about it so much. So, that's when I was probably about maybe 12, I think 12 years old, 11 or 12 when I did that. I hate inhaling mosquitoes. Oh God, I hate inhaling them as well. You have to stop fighting them or they will wear you out. That is for sure. Hard no on making offerings to the mosquitoes. All right, I'm telling you, I'm telling you, it worked for me. I mean, but I get it. I hear where you're coming from. Oatmeal should be sponsored. So PepsiCo that owns Pepsi owns Quaker Oats. And I remember a long time ago, I tried to reach out to them to see, and I just realized they're just such a massive business that I just don't think they care about little old Jim, Let's see. Can you share any trips you got planned for 2025? By the way, Xander Budnick, he's a guy I trip with, just got 1 million subs. What a champ this guy is. I just talked to him and my brother about a potential spring trout fishing trip. Now, where my camp is, my new cabin, in Northern Ontario, we call them camps. BC, they call them a cabin. And Central Ontario, Southern Ontario, they call it a cottage, or it gets mixed up a lot around here. But so my cottage or camp or whatever water access and about a 22-kilometer boat ride. And behind it, within canoeing distance, there are some remote backcountry trout lakes, brook trout lakes, that I think might have some giants in them. And I've already plotted out an entire route. Hudson's woken up and he's having a meltdown. And I've already plotted out an entire route. The route includes a 5-kilometer portage. There might be a float plane involved because of that. I don't know. But I've invited Xander and Ted on this trip. So stay tuned for that. And next year, I haven't decided for sure. I might do like a 2-week solo trip earlier in the year. Good chance I will do that. But essentially what I want to be doing is just moving into my cabin with the entire family and exploring that area, doing one trip, taking a float plane in for a family trip somewhere not too far away from there, but just exploring that area, fixing up the cabin, getting it set up, doing some solar trips, doing some family trips, and just including all of that in our content. So I'm super excited about that. Crow Talking, thank you very much for the donation there. I appreciate it. It's a camp in Maine, no cottages or lake houses here. Oh, cool. Yeah. And I think, even in Southern Ontario, and when I say Southern Ontario, there's still some pretty rural places in Southern Ontario. So Southern Ontario still includes all of Central Ontario. It's essentially just anywhere south of the French River. But now where I live is, I think, about 30K south of the French River. But now they CBC calls where I live Northern Ontario too. So I don't know, but where my family's cottage was east of Bancroft, but everything was called a camp there because there are more fishing camps, and one of them was owned by the Genesee Beer Company, and one of them was a camp that was a lodge, and they all had their CB handles, and our handle was Camp Baird, and really creative, right? But then before I was born, everybody just started calling them cottages, I guess, because it became it wasn't so off grid anymore. And they weren't just it was more of a vacation, family vacation. It was supposed to be a fish camp. I don't know, but that just kind of changed. Cottages have power, cabins don't. That's how I've learned it. Yukon or living in Ontario. Right on. Adam, thanks for chiming in. Camps to the south, less than an hour away. Camp in New Brunswick as well. Okay, yeah, so that's what you guys call them too. Yeah, that's what we want to see. More cabin videos. Bush is bush. That's the truth. How do you handle pee and poo situation in your canoe trips? Landing overboard. So I have a friend of mine in Moosonee, Logan Jeffries. He's Cree, and he calls me Winisk. And I said, he said, "You know why you call me Winisk?" He's like, "Well, because Winisk means groundhog." And he said, like the Winisk River. And he says, because you'll never see a groundhog poo. And he told the story about this conversation his grandparents got in, and his grandmother said, well, groundhogs just clearly don't poo because you never see their poo. And just to obviously, who even notices whether groundhogs poo or not? Obviously people just know the bush so well, right? Anyways, and he says, so I call you Winisk, I call you groundhog, because in your videos we never see you poo. So it's just funny, but also he's kind of saying that we always see you leave the land how you found it, which is, you're not pooing and leaving your poo there, right? So it's more of a metaphor for how we leave the land. So, even though he's teasing me a bit, it still felt good. But yeah, so I just, I don't, to be honest with you, I don't really ever use toilet paper. I find toilet paper is the one thing that leaves garbage and stuff everywhere. Who wants to see toilet paper around? So you have to bury it. So what I do is I just I always use the thunder box if there's one. I don't go and dig a 4-foot deep hole and all that kind of stuff. I just poo far away where nobody's going to find it and cover it up. And to pee, I just like in the canoe. Sometimes I just sit back and push really hard and just pee over the side. A little bit splashes on you at the end, but you know what? It's just pee. It's just pee, right? Or you pull over and you're good to go. I bought myself a Council Tools Hudson Bay axe based on your recommendation from Livestream. It's a beaut. Council Tools Hudson Bay axe. What a beauty axe that is. I have, what else do I have here? Hold on a second. Well, I don't have what I was hoping, but it was a Council Tools, or actually it might have been Council Tools, but it's a Hudson Bay knife, which is actually the pre-knife. So I wanted to jump, but I didn't find that. But what I found is this. So I'm not sure if Council Tools axe comes with a proper sheath, but we were talking about a proper sheath. I had this sheath made specifically. Now this is made by Adventure Forge on Instagram, also on YouTube. My friend Chris Johnston, who's a modern day blacksmith, so he made this custom for one of my Hudson Bay axes. He also made another one for Hudson Bay axe he made out of me. But that's what you got for safety. You got to get, or you can buy one at a hardware store that's one size fits all. It doesn't have to be leather. In fact, like as long as leather clips up, like this has been wet for days and it hasn't stretched. But the key is that the axe handle goes through here, and then this clips on really strong, and so this can't pull off. The ones that are just the bit that cover just the bit, the sheaths that cover just the axe blade and clip up, no good. Take it from a guy who put an axe through the back of his hand. Anyways, glad you like that thing. Xander, John, and James are on YouTube have shared their poo stories, and did we really need them to? LOL. Yeah, I don't know how many people wanted to hear that, but I was asked a question by a loyal viewer of my channel, and I decided I wanted to share. Broadleaf aster is great toilet paper. Yeah, I think that's one of the things. Like you go to some of the parks, and if everyone's wiping with leaves, you're going to be like in moss. There's going to be like no moss and leaves. They're going to be all torn up all over the place, right? So maybe everybody shouldn't do that at campsites that are widely used, especially when there is a thunderbox. But like wiping with moist moss, it even has like properties that I believe are that kill germs. I'm not thinking of the word for that right now. But yeah, and it's just moist. If you have a hemorrhoid problem and you're wiping your butt with like a moist moss, hemorrhoid problem's gone out the door. It's way better, What the F is a thunderbox? Thunderbox is just a fancy word for like, it's basically an outhouse without walls. Right, so it's just a big square box with a lid on it like this that closes. When you lift up the lid, there's a hole, and there, in it like an outhouse hole, and you poop on it. So a lot of campsites, well-used campsites will have these. Sometimes, like conservation authorities, like the Friends of Temagami on public land or crown land areas, will put those in. Sometimes Ontario parks will, for example, if they're in public parks or national park systems and stuff like that. I see. No problem. Are there any adventures in Atlantic Canada that excite you? Well, I mean, off the top of my head, I'd love to go salmon fishing on the Miramichi. We did the Bonaventure River. Of course, does Labrador counts as Atlantic Canada? Oh, man, I love Labrador. Too bad the caribou aren't there as they once were. But yeah, of course, Newfoundland. I did Newfoundland. I'd like to go do a trip, paddle a river in Newfoundland. That would be pretty cool. A whitewater river, if anything. What else? Oh, there's so much. There's so much stuff. It's just so cool. Yeah. But off the top of my head, other than multiple trips in Labrador, and Newfoundland. I did a moose hunt there. I'd love to do that again, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I want to do. But maybe I should. Maybe you should give me a heads up. What should I go do in Atlantic Canada? Best sleeping bag for freezing temps. What is the best sleeping bag for freezing temps? Great question. Honestly, it's gonna hurt. You know, the wallet. You know, it's gotta hurt if you really want a good one. I would check out the Bison Gore by Western Mountaineering if they still make it or something like that. Bottom line, a -40 sleeping bag. You want a -40 mountaineering sleeping bag. And just to step it up a notch, get a sleeping bag liner, and then you're going to be good till about -50. But yeah, check out Western Mountaineering, the Bison Gore. It's killer. A river running, bank camping. Your canoeing skills have taught me to learn how to paddle. Well, thanks very much. You're too funny. Subs for more oatmeal. Thanks. I have taken hair from the dog groomer and dropped it around camp perimeter. Maybe psychological, but I've kept bears away in over 35 years. Adirondack camping. Bears hate dogs, so maybe it works. I think in the Adirondacks, bears are more of an issue because they're more habitualized. You've run into that sometimes in Algonquin Park. Let's say there's an area that people have been camping in a well-used part of the park, multiple times a week from the spring all the way to the fall. And that even if nobody's leaving food around, and the odd people do, that, it might start to smell. So yeah, that's probably a great idea. I know a guy up here. He walks his dog around his property and lets him pee on stuff every day, and he thinks that helps keep the bears away. Was from Wisconsin originally. Are you doing any meet and greets in the near future? More Windbound Pilsner news. I'm hoping to do at least one. This is top secret right now, but I'm working on something with Williams lures. I don't know if everybody sees the lures I use. Williams Nipigon, Williams Whitefish, Williams Wobblers. I've been catching a ton of lake trout on, stuff like that. They're coming out with something really exciting and new, and I want to work with them to design a couple lures to my specs. And I'd like to put together a little backcountry fishing kind of tackle box. Anyways, I've said too much, but I might do a meet and greet to launch that. Also, yes, Windbound, it sold out. It did great, and they're going to be making more, and it might be available in a store near you come spring. Maybe not like you're thinking, I don't know, but yeah, they're going to be brewing a ton more of it is the bottom line. So stay tuned. Can't wait. I feel like can't wait to drink another one. Don't step on me, Steph. Well, thanks, Steph. You're living vicariously through me and Tori and Fam, and you need a hip replacement. Well, I hope that you get it one day, but sounds like you're making the best of it. And yeah, nope, we're happy for you to live vicariously through us. So thank you. Have you ever had the opportunity to dog sled on one of your trips? Yes, but not in a large facet. So if you want to check out Sky High Wilderness Ranch in the Yukon, Tori and I rode dog sleds with Sky High when we were staying there in the wintertime. Dog sledding is one of those. So Sky High is one of the only companies that will let you take your own team of dogs out for 10-day adventures, backcountry adventures. So typically they'll have as many as like 9 people in a group. Each person will get their own dog team. They'll spend 5 days teaching you everything you need to know about the dogs, how to handle them, how to treat them, all their names, how to mush a dog team. You'll become you'll get a crash course in being an awesome dog musher. And it's all super fun with amazing people. Then you go out on a 5-6 day backcountry adventure, camping out on your way. They have some preset canvas tents along the way, or some you're just making yourselves, and you get your own team and you manage them yourself. So they're like the only people that do that. So that is something that I would love to do. It's also something that I feel like is something that you are going to have to use a company or a guided excursion through, because jumping into dog sledding, it's a lifestyle. It's not like buying a canoe where you can be like, well, we never used a canoe. Well, we'll just leave it in the garage. Ho hum. It's like you got these dogs to take care of. So yeah. Can't wait for the new Tundra episode tomorrow. Any teasers as to how many are left in the series? Yeah, so tomorrow, a teaser would be we're at Wilberforce Falls and Canyon. It's crazy. It's by far the best, coolest, most visually appealing thing of the series. Right now, we're probably looking at, I don't know, maybe another 4 episodes, maybe 3 episodes. Yeah, and then we're going to, once we finish the Teslin River expedition with the kids, we're going to be jumping into some other Yukon content as well. Yeah, I'm still going to be pumping out other stuff. So lots more stuff to come. But yeah, I'm seeing probably like 4 more episodes. Terminally ill and have joined the wild. Learning from you is a blessing and my final destination. Wow, thank you very much. That means a lot to you. Yeah, that must be challenging, but it just goes to show it's always exciting to learn things. So I find that attitude to be extremely inspiring. Thank you. At what age do you think you'll have to stop doing these longer trips? That's a good question. It depends on how broken I am once I get older. But I don't know if it's about as long as the trips or as physically demanding. There's some people that can do these Arctic trips into their 70s. However, they're not doing Arctic trips that have whitewater that takes a high level of athleticism and back-breaking portages. Are doing trips that take no portaging. And, sometimes by the time you're 73, you realize you don't need to carry the kitchen sink with you wherever you go to. So you pack lighter because you don't have a choice, right? So yeah, I don't know how long I'm going to do. It just depends on my genetics and how healthy I keep myself as well. Whether I'm doing YouTube or not, I'm hoping I can continue doing them into my 70s, but maybe not the level. That's why I try to do all the hard trips now. So I still have some leftover ones that are a little bit less challenging, but more beautiful. When does season 2 of your podcast start up? I don't know, but I'm filming my next episode tomorrow. I got some other interesting people on it too. So stay tuned. I don't know if I'm going to get as many episodes in as last year, or if I'm going to spread them out a bit more, or maybe I'll get more. And I don't know, but there's going to be some interesting stuff there. So yeah, tomorrow I'm recording the first episode. So soon. Ever had to shoot something? No, negative. Yeah, never had to shoot anything, thankfully. But if you had to, hopefully the time's not coming, but if you got to do it, you got to do it, right? How many cameras do you bring on your big adventures? I think that would be a great idea for a live stream. In fact, now that we're coming to an end here, it's been over 2 hours. I think that, what was I going to say? Yeah, I think that would be an interesting idea for a live stream, behind the scenes, how I film. But for example, on my Arctic adventure, I brought two mirrorless camcorders, one with a 70 to 200, two mirrorless cameras, one with a 70 to 200 lens. Those are Sony A7s, A7 IV, one with a wide angle 16 to 35 lens. Then I bring a Sony Handycam, which is a 4K camcorder. Then I bring an aerial drone. So now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, counting the drone. And then I bring 2 GoPros. So that's 7 cameras. Sometimes I bring a backup GoPro. I don't film with it. But essentially, yeah, I'm editing between all of those cameras. Now, usually during the day, I'm shooting between the 2 GoPros and then my one zoom camera that I'm pulling out as I'm traveling and getting those zoom in shots and stuff like that. And then at camp, I'm more using a single camera and the wide angle. So in the day, it's like I use the drone once or twice, 2 cameras and 3 cameras, but 4. And then at camp, it's like 1 camera and maybe a drone. So kind of 2. So yeah, the edits are challenging, and I actually hired an editor that's gonna help go through some of my content, and you know um, and some of my existing content, and he's just like, you're editing 2 like he's just like, this guy worked in television for years. He just can't believe that I'm putting up 2 full videos a week. He's like, that is a lot of work. I'm like, thank you that somebody realizes this, right? But yeah, he's going to be editing some stuff that I think is going to be really exciting. Um, like sort of like compilation type stuff. Like one he's doing now is going to be called 5 Years of Backcountry Trout Fishing. I want to get some of the best of my family adventures, these kinds of things, which sort of like, because a lot of the time I'm doing series. And as great as that is, I think that taking a bunch of cool things and really condensing them down into with some new footage that hasn't been seen before too, but into a totally different feeling. Some of those videos are the ones that do the best on my channel. And yeah, so I'm going to be trying to work on a few of them. You should make some merch with the theme cowboy coffee, like a Nalgene with a cowboy hat. I would totally 100% buy a t-shirt. That's a great idea. Thank you. Actually, I just, for anybody that's just joining in, I had a bunch of these hats. This specific one is sold out, but there's a camo one. There's a military gray one. I had some of these made a while ago, and I sold them and gave a percentage of my sales to Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. And they've kind of just been sitting there. So Tori's like, let's try to sell these things. So if you go check it out, I'm selling them right now. There's not too many left, but that's Jim Baird Adventure. It's got my logo on it there. They're very quality, like they're high quality hats. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to make more either. So if you want to get one, check it out. Let's see, maybe one more question. Much respect to you and Tori. What kind of drone would you recommend for a beginner? We have a 9-acre lot in Merrickville, Ontario. Check out a Mavic Mini. I don't really know a lot about different kinds of drones, so that might be more advanced than you need as a beginner, but I don't think so. I think a Mavic Mini would be a great start. Tori, that's the right spelling. Tori looks, Tori, yeah, Tori. Tori's name is short for Victoria. Anybody that doesn't know that. I love my family. I love your content. Look forward to more. Thanks very much. God bless you and your family. Thank you. Safe journeys. Thank you very much. Love from Western Washington. Your family is amazing, inspiring. Jim and Tori. Thank you very much. Any tree knocks, unidentifiable sounds. He's talking about Bigfoot. Well, when you're deer hunting, you hear. So deer will, when they rub, they'll come up to a tree and go, and they'll hit the tree with their antlers, and then you'll hear. because they're scraping, they're rubbing. And so it's called a rub. But sometimes when the deer are further away, you don't hear the quieter rubbing, you just hear the initial knock. So I think a lot of people that think that that's Bigfoot, but it's really just a deer in the rutting season. And maybe sometimes it is Bigfoot, but yeah, anyways, I don't personally believe in Bigfoot, but if you do, that's fun. Have a good one, Jim. Big fan in Etobicoke. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much, Jim. Do you have an everyday carry? My everyday carry is my Leatherman. I think it's a Wave. It's just a small size Leatherman. And I feel like I don't need to bring this thing today. And then I'm like, oh, I don't have my Leatherman. I'm just like, I need it and use it every day. So that's my everyday carry. Okay. Well, ever seen some crazy animal fights? One time my old dog fought an otter, and the otter just like ran up and attacked it, and they're in water this deep in lily pads, and they're just beating the tar out of each other. Neither one seemed injured, but the otter like came up to my dog and like tried to pedal it, and my dog fought it. It was wild, you know. Is it shoulder? It's shoulder season. When is it too cold to get in a canoe? I think when everything kind of freezes up. So you could still, some people are still doing canoe trips. Comes with an added level of danger because of the water and stuff like that. But yeah, so you could say it's kind of shoulder season now. But that's more, between canoeing and winter activities. But for me, this is like I do, I had the freighter canoe out doing stuff like that. So this time of year for me is more like hunting season. I still camp. I just got off of, I was just camping in a wall tent. I just finished an edit on a video myself, but I just finished camping for 7 days. Then I was at my cottage closing up camp, hunted there for 3 days, cut wood. So this time I'm not usually subscribe and share. Thank you. This time of year I'm not usually doing my typical canoe trips. And canoe trips for me start in the spring after ice out and go into the early fall, for sure. So, okay. Well, hey, we've been at it for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I really enjoyed this live chat. I feel bad that I didn't get to as many people as I wanted to. So yeah, I spent my entire life at camps from Sudbury. Catherine Baird. Hey, Catherine. Glad you could join us. Thank you. Yeah, so really cool. I read a lot of comments. I read a lot of the comments that were coming in that I didn't necessarily comment back on. So really good questions. Had a lot of fun, and I'll see everyone next Wednesday. Why don't you, if you have an idea about what you want the topic to be, shoot me a note in the comments and let me know what you think a cool topic would be. Okay, thanks everyone. Now comes the part where I have to awkwardly figure out how to turn this off. There we go.